Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala ma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so now we're moving on to the next couple in the mansubat. The next one we have here is al-Ḥāl, the circumstantial adverb. The one after this is called tamīz, and both of these are incredibly important. Okay, let's dive right in. Let's see what the author says. قال باب الحال. The author, the muallif, he says باب الحال, the chapter regarding the circumstantial adverb. الحال هو الاسم المنصوب المفسر لمن بهم من الهيئات. That the hal is the mansub ism which clarifies. The mansub ism which clarifies the circumstances and attributes of a thing which are obscure, which are hidden, which are unclear. So in bahama means unclear. So in other words, when you hear the noun and you hear that Zayd came, then it's unclear whether he came riding, or whether he came laughing, or whether he came jumping up and down, or he came dancing. So the circumstance of his coming is unclear. Just by hearing the verb and just by hearing the noun, you don't know anything about the circumstance. So basically what this adverb does is it clarifies the circumstance that is unknown, and the speaker might choose to disclose it. He may or may not. So it's fadla, it's not umda. Umda is something that's essential. Without it, there's no sentence. Like the mubtada is essential, the khabar is essential, the fa'il is essential, the naib fa'il is essential. These are all umda. Everything else is after the fa'il, the verb has taken its fa'il, or after the mubtada has taken its khabar. You have an additional detail that gives more and tells you some circumstance that would otherwise be unclear. Okay, so where else does this happen? Think about it. It happens in Naʿt, it happens in badal, it happens in those tawabi' that we discussed earlier, that we have an adjective that clarifies and tells us something about the noun, or we have another noun that tells us something about the previous noun. So like if it's a jamid, then we call that atful bayan, and if it's a mushtaq, then we call that naʿt, right? And if it's a jamid and it's the more important word, and the first word is merely paving the way for the second word, then we call that badal. Okay, so when he says al-ismul mansubul mufassir, okay, this is incredibly important. Okay, pay attention. This is so important. When he says al-ismul mansubul mufassir, right out of the gate, what the author is saying is that we have here an ism that is part of a phrase. Can you see that? Okay, think about it. When he says al-ismul mansubul mufassir, we have an ism that's mansub and it's clarifying blank. It's got to clarify something. So there's a previous noun about which something is unclear, and this second ism is clarifying something about the first ism. Now, in the case of the Naʿt, he didn't use the word mufassir. He used the word al-muwaddih or al-mukhassis. So the Naʿt, actually he didn't. The Sharih, the commentator, Sheikh Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid, when he talked about the Naʿt, he said that the Naʿt, it either muwaddih clarifies the noun at the front in the case of ma'arif, or it specifies and modifies in the case of nakira. So it reduces the application. So when you say man, then it could be any conceivable man from the billions of men on earth. But when you say rajulun tawilun, now you've narrowed it down and you've modified it. Okay, so this hal does something similar. But over there, the word he uses al-muwaddih, tawdih, and takhsis. And over here, he's using the word tafsir. He's using a different word, different adjective, tafsir. Okay, when he says al-ismul mansub, he's telling you that here we have a second half of a phrase, but it doesn't match the earlier ism. Okay, so the commentator is going to say al-ismul mansubu فَخَرَجَ بِهِ الْمَرْفُوعُ وَالْمَجْرُورُ, that when the author said al-mansub, then by that he's excluded the marfu and he's excluded the majrur. But you know what? If you ask me, the reason he's saying this, the author, the muallif, is because he's trying to distinguish it from the Naʿt. Because in the case of the Naʿt, it's not mansub. The Naʿt is tabi' lil-man'ud. So it matches in grammatical positioning the noun at the front. So in other words, if you say Zayd, the rider came to me, So what you're doing now is you're talking about Zayd's profession, and you're talking about what kind of person he is, and you're not talking about the circumstance. You see, so it's a description that's of the person, as opposed to a description of the way in which the verb occurred. So it's not the answer to the question how. When I say Zayd the rider came to me, I'm not answering the question how. But when I say Zayd came to me riding, I am answering the question how. You see? So it clarifies the circumstances that would be unclear and unknown otherwise. So like how did he come? Did he come riding? Did he come laughing? Did he come jumping up and down? Did he come dancing? So those circumstances may be important to the speaker. So how do you communicate them? You communicate them through an ism mansub, and not an ism which is tabi' lil fa'il. So in other words, matching. So the difference, and the other thing is that there's a ma'rifa nakira difference. In the case of the Naʿt, both of them need to be ma'rifa in order to create the meaning. Zayd the rider came to me. Zayd, who's a rider by profession, came to me. But in order to do this, it's nakira. So and not only that, but the state is changed and altered, and they're not matching. Okay, because you don't want to get confused with that one, right? So Zaydun rakiban versus Zaydun rakib, and you will hear that nowhere else. Okay, what I just told you there. And inshallah, let me know in the comments if you found that insightful. So it's a ism mansub. The other thing is that when he says ism, the author, he doesn't mean just ism. He's using it in a more inclusive sense that includes the ism sarih. In other words, an actual ism like dahikan or rakiban, and also something which is mu'awwal bis sarih, something that's a jumla or a shibhul jumla that could be interchanged with an ism. So for example, ja'ni zaydun yadhaku can be replaced with ja'ni zaydun dahikan, and they both have overall the same meaning. Okay, and another example is like in the stories of the Prophet's book, it says that وَقَصَدَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ مَكَّةَ, and Ibrahim ﷺ made Makkah his destination, وَمَعَهُ زَوْجُهُ هَاجَرُ, while along with him was his wife Hajar. So this along with him was his wife Hajar, all of that together is Ḥāl. And the waw in the middle, we call that the although waw. It's the waw haliyah. And that ma'ahu zawjuhu is a full sentence. It's a jumla ismiyah. So when he says al-ismun mansubu, then it sort of excludes yadhaku, and it excludes ma'ahu zawjuhu hajaru. So how do you so do you say that the author made a mistake and he should have said huwa lafdhul mansub and went more broad, or not even talk about the Naṣb part and say lafdhun yadullu ala hay'ati al-fa'ili aw al-maf'uli aw kilayhima, that a hal is an utterance which indicates the circumstance and the state of either the fa'il, the maf'ul bihi, or both. Okay, which is the way they do it in the Hidayatul Nahu book. So they use the word lafdhun, for lack of a better word, that's inclusive of both ism as well as jumla. So over here when he says ism, we're going to assume that the author means he means in a general sense that's inclusive of the ism sarih as well as the ism mu'awwal bis sarih. That could be interchanged. So in the yadhaku, that can easily be substituted with dahikan, and overall the meaning would be similar. Not identical, but it will be similar. And in the ma'ahu zawjuhu, it could be like qasada Ibrahimu makkata musahiban zawjahu. Musahiban zawjahu. So musahiban is an ism. You see, and the commentator will talk more about these things later. So a couple of points, and I'm dwelling on this, and the reason I'm dwelling on this is because Ḥāl is incredibly important, and if you understand Ḥāl, you understand a whole lot. Like many verses of the Quran will start opening up to you, and you'll be able to understand the nuances, the things that get lost in translation. Okay, so what have we covered so far? So Ḥāl is part of a phrase, and the author here is suggesting that when he says and it's the kind of phrase where the two are not matching. So it's a phrase which is not an extension. Okay, so he's trying to distinguish it from the Naʿt and the Badal and the Atful Bayan and those other ones, because those ones do match, and this one doesn't match, because this one has a fixed state of Naṣb. Now it's possible that the Dhul Ḥāl is also in Naṣb. So I saw a man riding, as opposed to I saw a man who's a rider by profession, or I saw Zayd tied up, or I hit Zayd tied up, I beat Zayd while he was in shackles. So that would be like darabtu Zaydan mashdudan. Darabtu Zaydan mashdudan, but it's not problematic because Zayd is definite and mashdudan is indefinite. So the definite, indefinite value are not matching, which would be a requirement for the case of the badal. Okay, so it's a second half of a phrase which has its own fixed state and it's not tabi'. Okay, he told us that much, and he says by using the word mufassir, he's distinguishing it from the na't, because the na't is muwaddih wa mukhasis, and this one here is not talking about the person of Zayd, but it's talking about Zayd in his capacity as the doer of the verb. In other words, as a comer, as a person arriving, how was he arriving? So it's the answer to the question how. So liman bahama, in bahama means khafiya wastatara, and the commentator will tell us more about that. And then he gives some examples. So there needs to be a verb at the front. In order for a hal to occur, there has to be a verb at the front, and that verb will be the amil. In the Zayd came to me writing example, that would be the verb ja'a. So if they ask you who gave Naṣb to Raqib, and the correct answer is ja'a did it. So there has to be a verb at the front, either a verb or something in the meaning of a verb, and the commentator will talk more about these things as we get into the commentary. Okay, now in the tamiz, which is the one after this, he starts off the definition the same. He says al-ismul mansubul mufassiru. Okay, so it's like, we'll do it inshallah, maybe in this video or maybe in the next video. So it's the ism mansub, but the thing with the tamiz is that it has to be an actual ism. Like it can't be a jumla, and it can't be something that's more elaborate, interpreted in the meaning of the ism. It has to be an actual ism. Tamiz has to be an actual ism, and it clarifies not the circumstance, but it clarifies the that. In other words, there's inherent vagueness in the meaning of the word itself, like a number. So when you say رأيت أحد عشر, I saw 11, so that's inherently vague. So kawkaban comes and removes that vagueness. So it removes the vagueness that's inherent within the dhawat, or within the nisab, within the subject-predicate relationship. So you say Zayd is the best. Taba Zaydun, Zayd is the best. And then the question is, in terms of what? Is he the best in terms of being an athlete? Is he the best in terms of being a teacher? So you add an extra word and you say Taba Zaydun aban. Zayd is the best in terms of being a father. So aban comes in and pinpoints the angle of the predication. So it's either clarifying vagueness within that, or within the relationship of the fi'l and the fa'il. That relationship itself is vague. In other words, the question is in what sense. So whatever noun you bring in order to answer that question would be a tamiz. Okay, so I think taking them together, hal and tamiz, and explaining them in this way, you'll find it more helpful. Now, with all of that background, we can now get into the book and now see what the commentator says, inshallah. And if there's anything different, then I'll dwell on that. I'll tell you what he's saying and why he's saying it. Okay? So the author, he gives some examples. He says, نَحْنَهُ قَوْلِكَ, such as you're saying, جَاءَ زَيْدٌ رَاكِبًا, Zayd came riding. Answer the question how. Classic canonical. This is a canonical example. Classic example. وَرَكِبْتُ الْفَرَسَ مُسْرَجًا, and I rode the horse saddled, while it was saddled. So it could be describing the circumstance of the fa'il, or describing the circumstance of the maf'ul bihi, or it could be such that muhtamil lil amrayn. It's possible that it could be interpreted both ways, describing the state of the fa'il or the maf'ul bihi, and it will be left to the context, and it will be the speaker's responsibility to somehow indicate to the audience which meaning is the intended one. Like the third example he gives, وَلَقِيتُ عَبْدَ اللَّهِ رَاكِبًا, and I met Abdullah riding. So in other words, I was riding and he was standing still, or vice versa. So لَقِيتُ عَبْدَ اللَّهِ, I met Abdullah while he was riding, or I met Abdullah riding. So that's muhtamil lil amrayn. وَمَا أَشْبَهَ ذَلِكَ, in similar examples. Okay, now let's get into the commentary. وَأَقُولُ الْحَالُ فِي اللُّغَةِ, in the dictionary, the word al-Ḥāl, it's مَا عَلَيْهِ الْإِنسَانُ مِنْ خَيْرٍ أَوْ شَرٍ. It's the particular circumstance, whether it be a good one or whether it be a bad one, that a human being is on. So he's in a state of good or he's in a state of evil. وَهُوَ فِي اصْطِلَاحِ النُّحَاةِ, and the word and the term hal, in the terminology of the grammarians, it refers to the ism fadla. عبارة عن الاسم الفضلة. This word is fadla with the fatah on the fa, and it's khilaf al-umda. Umda is something that's essential, and fadla is non-essential, accidental. You can call it accidental, you can say non-essential, or something which is a detail. عن الاسم الفضلة, it refers to the ism, the non-essential ism, which is mansub, al-mufassiri, that clarifies liman bahama min al-hayat, that clarifies the circumstances that are hidden and unclear. In bahama. So the word mubham means vague. In bahama means, it's a verb from that, like in fatara. Okay, I think that's fine. Let's continue. Now he unpacks the definition and tells you the benefit of every one of those words within the definition. وَقَوْلُنَا الْإِسْمُ, and our first word in the definition, al-ismu, is a jins. Like it's a broad word and it's meant to be inclusive. So he says يشمل الصريحة, it includes truisms. مثل ضاحكا في قولك جاء محمد ضاحكا, Muhammad came laughing. So the word ضاحكا fits the definition, it's an ism. ويشمل المؤول بالصريح, and it also includes larger structures that could be interpreted down into the meaning of the sarih, that could be interpreted and understood as if it's an ism, like the interchanging I talked about earlier. مثل يضحك, because يضحك is not an ism. Okay, is it a verb? They say no, it's a sentence, because yadhak actually has a huwa inside it. Along with this huwa, we don't call it a verb. Along with the huwa, we call it a jumla. So yadhak is actually a jumla. في قولك, in your statement, جاء محمد يضحك, Muhammad came laughing. It's almost an identical translation. Now there's nuances, there's some differences there that are beyond scope of Naḥw. Those will be discussed in the books of Balagha. But bottom line is that يضحك is مؤول بالصريح. It's not an ism, but it's مؤول بالاسم الصريح. فإنه في تأويل قولك, because جاء محمد يضحك is in the interpretation of your other statement ضاحكا. In other words, they both mean the same thing at the basic meaning level. وكذلك قولنا, and similar to that is our statement جاء محمد معه أخوه. Muhammad came while along with him was his brother. So over here, أخوه is mubtada. Okay, now معه أخوه on its own is a full sentence, and that sentence is in place of Naṣb, and it's Muhammad is Dhul Ḥāl, and Dhul Ḥāl and Ḥāl together connect and function as a single unit, and they become the fa'il for جاء. فإنه في تأويل قولك, because معه أخوه is in the interpretation of your other statement مصاحبا لأخيه, accompanying his brother. Muhammad came accompanying his brother. Muhammad came along with him was his brother. They both mean the same thing. وَقَوْلُنَا, so that relieves the author from using a more broad word. He just used the word al-ism, but it's not that he's trying to exclude yadhak and he's trying to exclude ma'ahu akhuhu. He's not. He's trying to include them as well, but then you'd have to adjust what you mean by ism in order for the definition to apply to more than just real isms. So that's what the commentator did there. وقولنا الفضل, and the term الفضل معناه أنه ليس جزءا من الكلام. What it means is that it's not a primary portion of the sentence. Okay, now, if you're a student of mine and if you study with me elsewhere, then when we're parsing sentences, we use the term major portion. So we say count the number of words, and we have like 10 words. We say these 10 words divide into two major portions, or these 10 words divide into 4 major portions: a fi'l, a fa'il, a muta'alliq, and a maf'ul fi. So over there, we're saying maf'ul fi is a major portion. We're saying muta'alliq is a major portion. Okay, so we have a larger number, and we're trying to take that larger number and fit it into a smaller number when we're doing parsing. So over here, that's not what he means. Over here, he means the absolute essential portions of the nominal sentence are just 2, mubtada and khabar. Anything beyond that would be fadla. In the case of the verbal sentence, the absolute essential portions of a verbal sentence are fi'l and fa'il. Anything beyond that would be a fadla. Even a maf'ul bihi, because you can omit a maf'ul bihi and the sentence is still valid. But you can't omit the fa'il. You have to represent the fa'il either in the form of a noun or a pronoun. So over here, hal is a ism which is fadla. In other words, so from that the fa'il would be excluded, naib fa'il would be excluded, but they're excluded anyways because they're not mansub, right? Maf'ul bihi and the rest of the details of the verb would be excluded. Well, no, they'd actually be included, and then the next part would exclude them. The mufassir liman bahama min al-hayat would exclude the maf'ul bihi, etc. So فخرج به الخبر. So by that the khabar is excluded. Now kana's khabar is in Naṣb. Kana's khabar is supposed to be in Naṣb, so we could say the khabar of kana is excluded because it's mansub, right? Okay. Actually, I think he used the term fadla first in the definition before he used the term mansub. Right? Yeah, he used the term fadla first. So the khabar is excluded by the word fadla, and then al-mansub would exclude other things. Okay, like the maf'ul bihi and no, al-mansub would exclude. Okay, whatever. Let's continue with the definition. I think it's pretty clear. Or he's just clarifying. Like, I mean, just because something is excluded with one clause, it doesn't mean you can't bring another clause and speak about the same thing from a different angle. So it's a fadla. So it's not from the primary portions of the sentence. So from that, the khabar would be excluded because the khabar is umda. وقولنا المنصوب خرج به المرفوع والمجرور, and the term al-mansub, through it is excluded al-marfu wal-majrur. Okay, now وإنما, so now he's speaking about the amil. For every hal, you have to have two things. You have to have a dhul hal and you have to have a amil. So if you know all the relevant principles and rules regarding the amil and what it could be, what it can't be, and how it needs to be, and the dhul hal and requirements for the dhul hal, that it has to be first, like overwhelmingly the dhul hal would be first and the hal would be second, unless the dhul hal is indefinite. If the dhul hal is indefinite, then the structure is inverted and the hal comes first, and he'll speak about that later in order to avoid confusion with the mawsuf sifa. Okay, that's the wisdom behind it. Is that okay? So he's saying that the hal would be one of three things, actually one of two things. وَإِنَّمَا يُنْسَبُ الْحَال, and the hal is only given nasab through either a verb or something in the meaning of a verb. Okay, now we have to be careful with what he's saying here. So when he says fi'al, he's talking about madi, mudari, amr. Those are called fi'al, something that has a tense, right? Like fi'al as opposed to ism and harf, that fi'al, part of speech fi'al. Shibhul fi'al, oftentimes it refers to a verb-like entity. Okay, masdar included. So we have masdar, we have ismul fa'il, we have ismul maf'ul, sifa mushabbaha like the word hasan, ismul tafdil like afdal. Not all mushtaq isms, because there's certain mushtaq isms that are not, they don't behave like verbs. Like the ismul dharf. Okay, not the maf'ul fi. Okay, we're talking about the kind of word, like the word masjid. The word masjid is a mushtaq ism that indicates the place of the sujud. The place of the sujud, right? Or maghrib, which indicates the time of when the sun sets. In other words, sunset time. So the word maghrib and the word masjid are not shibhul fi'al. They're mushtaq isms, but they're not shibhul fi'al. Okay, so that's a distinction that you can consider like a footnote, something to keep in mind. Over here, shibhul fi'al is anything that has the meaning of a verb. So he's using it more broadly than we would normally use the term shibhul fi'al, and we would refer specifically to those 4 or 5 items that I listed: masdar, ismul fa'il, ismul maf'ul, sifa mushabbaha, ismul tafdil, and sighatul mubalagha. Like those are the ones. Those are called shibhul fi'al. But he's saying more than that. A dharf is also a shibhul fi'al. Okay, now so anything that's an actual verb, or it has the masdar meaning and it's behaving like a verb, or it's presupposing a verb. Okay, and that's what he's saying here. What does it mean to presuppose a verb? A jar majrur, because every jar majrur needs to connect to either a verb or a verb-like entity. So if there's no verb and there's no verb-like entity in the vicinity, then we can say that this jar majrur is connecting to the word mawjudun, or connecting to the word situated, and then you can have a hal coming later. Okay, like that. So there has to be something, and there has to be either an actual verb or something that behaves like a verb, masdar, ismul fa'il, etc., or something that presupposes a verb. And dharf presupposes a verb. Ismul ishara also presupposes a verb. Okay, how is that? Because they say that the ismul ishara, there's hadha. So the ha is for tanbih. It's a harf, and it's for tanbih, and it's to alert. Okay, so when you say ha, you're gathering the person's attention because you're about to say something important. You're about to draw their attention to something. So you say hadha in order to make sure that they're listening to you. And the dha is the equivalent of pointing and gesturing and referring to something. So when a person says hadha, there is as if they're saying unabbihu wa ushiru. I'm alerting and I'm referring. So it's like when you say ya, which is the harf of nida, when you're evoking, you say ya Zayd or O Zayd. It's the equivalent of saying ad'u Zaydan. I am summoning Zayd. So ya is the particle of nida which stands in the place of ad'u. And hadha is a ismul ishara and it stands in the place of unabbihu wa ushiru. So this is all So you could say every time a person speaks an ismul ishara, what's hovering in the background is a verb. And the verb is I am alerting and I am referring. So you're alerting and referring without having to use the verb. You just say hada. And the feature and function of hada is to alert and to refer. So the referring and the alerting is an action. So this is an example of not a verb. Hada is not a verb, but it's presupposing a verb, or it's pointing towards a verb that's hovering in the background. Okay, I think, yeah, so that's how you would explain this, right? وَقَوْلُنَا الْمُفَسِّرُ لِمَنْ بَهَ مِنَ الْهَيْئَاتِ, and the last portion of the definition, that which clarifies the circumstances that are hidden and unclear. معناه أن الحال, what that means is that the حال يفسر, clarifies ما خفي واستتر من صفات ذوي العقل أو غيرهم, the attributes and the qualities of humans and non-humans that are hidden and unclear. So like laughing is an attribute that human beings can have, but it's not essential to the nature of the human. Like, I mean, it could be there, it could not be there, right? Or it could be an attribute that is within the noun, and the person just felt, the speaker felt that listing it separately would be helpful, and it would clarify further. So like in the Quran it says, "Tutla alayhim ayatuna bayyinatin." إِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُنَا بَيِّنَاتٍ, when our verses are recited in front of them, which happen to be incredibly clear, because verses already have clarity built into them. Ayatuna, because an ayah is bayyina by definition. So when it says bayyinatin in Naṣb, then that's an example of a sifa which is masquerading as a hal. Okay, did you get that? Did you understand that? It has a special name. It's called hal mu'akkida. So there's numerous kinds of hals. There's the normal hal. There's the projecting hal, where the tense of the verb at the front and the tense of the hal is not the same, because normally it would be like simultaneous. Zayd came to me riding, so the riding and the coming both happen at the same time. So if the person's arrival was at or his journey was between 4 and 6, then the riding was also between 4 and 6. When he says Zayd came to me riding, you're suggesting that the coming and the riding were simultaneous. And it could also be hal projected, where the amil is occurring first, culminating in the hal. And the example is فَتَبَسَّمَ ضَاحِكًا مِنْ قَوْلِهَا, where Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, he saw the ants and he heard their conversation and he smiled, culminating in laughter. فَتَبَسَّمَ ضَاحِكًا مِنْ قَوْلِهَا, because smiling happens first and laughter is where it culminates. So that's called the hal muqaddira. So it projects. It's a projecting hal. We have a simultaneous hal, we have a projecting hal, and hopefully you can see how these things, how they're relevant in understanding the Quran, in tafsir. Like, you're not going to be able to understand a lot of verses unless you're aware of these distinctions we're making today. So watch this video a couple of times, really important video. Let's continue. So the attributes, so he, instead of using circumstances, he used the word attributes. So, because I guess he's trying to include essential attributes and also accidental, non-essential ones. So riding is an example of something which is accidental, non-essential, and some of these other attributes could be like the clarity of the verses. When our verses are recited in front of them, that happen to be incredibly clear. So you would translate that as a mawsuf sifa, but it's just formatted as a hal, and there's some balagha benefit associated to why that would be done. Okay, I think that's fine. Okay, so let's get back to this. وقولنا المفسر لمن بهم من الهيئات معناه أن الحال يفسر ما خفي واستتر من صفات ذوي العقل أو غيرهم. It means that the hal clarifies the attributes of human beings. ذوي العقل means human beings, and also non-humans that are hidden and unclear. ثم إنه قد يكون بيانا لصفة الفاعل, and then it could be clarifying. It could be a clarification of an attribute of the fa'il, such as جاء عبد الله راكبا. So over here he's using the term attribute in the meaning of circumstance. Okay, because we're not talking about Abdullah who's a writer by profession. We're talking about we're giving the answer to the question how, which is what I told you in the beginning of the lesson. So I think the commentator here, he's being a little vague and imprecise when he uses the word sifa. He should use the word hay'a, and that would be, because 9 out of 10 times hal doesn't describe sifa, it describes hay'a. Okay, but I guess the term sifa is like it includes hay'a, I guess. So he's using it in the more broad sense. Okay, أو بيان لصفة المفعول به, or it clarifies the attribute, meaning the circumstance of the مفعول به, such as ركبت الفرس مسرجا, which was the second example the muallif gave in the matan. وقد يكون محتملا للأمرين جميعا, and sometimes it could conceivably be either of the two. It would have the possibility of either of the two together, and both possibilities would exist simultaneously, and then it would be the responsibility of the speaker to be clear that the listener does not get confused. لقيت عبد الله راكبا. Okay, now he says that it's not just the fa'il and the maf'ul bihi that can have their circumstances clarified by way of a hal. Other things within the sentence can also conceivably have hals. Okay, like based on my understanding, a naifai would work. Okay, like instead of a fa'il and a maf'ul bihi, it could be a naifai, because a naifai essentially is a maf'ul bihi. Isn't that right? When the fa'il goes missing, the maf'ul bihi takes over and becomes a primary portion of the sentence. So obviously, whatever is valid in the case of a fa'il or a maf'ul bihi would be valid in the case of a naifai. Okay, and object of a preposition could also have a hal. Okay, because every object of a preposition is very close to being a maf'ul bihi. An object of a preposition is very close to being a maf'ul bihi. The only difference is that in the case of the maf'ul bihi, we call that a direct object. Like يَعْبُدُونَ هَذِهِ الْأَصْنَامِ, that these people are worshipping these idols. An object of a preposition is يَسْجُدُونَ لِهَذِهِ الْأَصْنَامِ, they're prostrating to these idols. Now, worshipping and prostrating are near synonyms. But in one case, we don't have a preposition, it's just a direct object. And in the second case, there's the medium of the preposition. So if you can have a hal from a maf'ul bihi, why wouldn't you be able to have a hal from an object of a preposition? I mean, it's fine. Isn't that right? Because bottom line, there's a verb in the vicinity. There has to be a verb in the vicinity to give the Naṣb. Okay, now in the case of a khabar, mubtada and khabar, it would work if you have a jar majroor, or if you can somehow create like a VLE and have a pronoun, and or presuppose a pronoun, like up there where he said that shibhul fi'l. Oh, then in a jumla ismiya, a hal would work. A hal would work in a jumla ismiya if there's a prepositional phrase, or if there's an ismul ishara at the front. If there's an ismul ishara at the front in a nominal sentence, then having a hal to clarify the circumstance would be valid. And the example of that is هذه ناقة الله لكم آية. هذه ناقة الله لكم آية. That this is the she-camel of Allah, which has been given to you, which has been granted to you ayatan, as a sign, as a miracle. It's been granted to you as a sign, as a miracle. So the lakum presupposes, you can make an argument and say lakum is presupposing a shibhul fi'l, and that's giving nasab to ayatan, or you can say the hadihi is doing it, because hadihi is suggesting, alerting and referring. So it's unabbihu wa ushiru is hovering in the background. Okay. So let's look what he says. He says وَكَمَا يَجِيءُ الْحَالُ مِنَ الْفَاعِلِ وَالْمَفْعُولِ بِهِ, and similar to how hal can occur from a fa'il and a maf'ul bihi, فَإِنَّهُ يَجِيءُ مِنَ الْخَبَرِ, it can also occur from a khabar. I'm not sure. Like it's only under certain circumstances you would be allowed to create a hal from a khabar. Like you can't give me dozens of examples from the Quran where this has occurred, where you have a hal coming from a mubtada khabar. It just doesn't happen. Okay, maybe the Kufiyin allow it. Okay, which this book is adopting the madhab of the Kufiyin mostly. Look at the example he gives. نحو أنت صديقي مخلصا. You are my friend who happens to be sincere. Who happens to be sincere. You are my friend who happens to. You are the one befriending me while being sincere. So أنت صديقي. So the word sadiq, although it's a noun, it would be mu'awwal. Like we'd take it in the meaning of befriending, which is a verb meaning. So and the ya would be sort of the person being befriended, maf'ul bihi. So sadiq would be sifa mushabbaha, or it would be, I don't know, you'd have to interpret it somehow. and it would be carrying a pronoun, and that pronoun would be the Dhul Ḥāl. And the word, if they ask you who gave the Naṣb to mukhlisan, the correct answer is the word Sadiq did it in its capacity as a verb-like entity. Okay, does that make sense? Now, although normally the word Sadiq would be a noun, but in order to justify the structure and validate it and not have it be an error, that's how I would understand it. Okay, so if you've studied these topics elsewhere, then comment in underneath the video and let me know what you thought of that. Okay, the commentator is not suggesting that. The commentator is just suggesting that the Sadiqi is the Dhul Ḥāl and Mukhlisan is the Hal, and the two together connect and form the Khabar. But my question would be, where is the Amil? You see, it defies the rules. Okay, look what he says now, and then he talks about the preposition, the noun that follows the preposition. وَقَدْ يَجِيءُ مِنَ الْمَجْرُورِ بِحَرْفِ الْجَرِّ. And a hal can also sometimes occur from a noun which is majroor because of a preposition. نَحْوُ مَرَرْتُ بِهِنْدٍ رَاكِبَةً. I passed by Hind while she was riding. This is fine, perfectly valid sentence. So the word, so the sentence would divide into a fi'l, a fa'il, and a muta'alliq. The muta'alliq is jar majroor, and the majroor then further divides into Dhul Ḥāl and Hal. And notice that Hindin and Rakibatan are not in the same state. Hindin is in jar because of the preposition, and Rakibatan is in Naṣb because Hal is supposed to be in Naṣb. Not only that, but the definite value of Hind and Rakiba is different, because Hind is definite by virtue of being a proper noun, and Rakibatan is indefinite. And he'll talk about the rulings with respect to definite, indefinite a little later. وَقَدْ يَجِيءُ مِنَ الْمَجْرُورِ بِالْإِضَافَةِ. And Hal can also occur from a noun which is majroor because of mudaf ilayh. نحو قوله تعالى, like the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَنِ اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. And I have been commanded, أَنِ اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا, that follow and adhere to the way and the religion of Ibrahim, in which there's no deviation whatsoever. Okay, so now the translation I gave you, in which there's no deviation whatsoever. So in other words, in the religion there's no deviation whatsoever. So I took the millat Ibrahim and made the word millah the Dhul Ḥāl. So it wouldn't be an example of what the commentator is trying to suggest here. And Hanifan is masculine, but that's not problematic because millah is a non-human feminine. So I mean, it's not a woman. It's not a woman. So millat Ibrahim Hanifan, in which there's no deviation whatsoever. But if you want to say that Ibrahim is Dhul Ḥāl and Hanifan is Hal, then that's fine as well. And the translation would be, and adhere to the millah of Ibrahim, who would incline away from all false ideologies and all false religions and focus himself on the one true God. Hanifan. فحنيفا حال من إبراهيم وإبراهيم مجرور بالفتحة نيابة عن الكسرة. And the word Ibrahim is majroor, reflected through the fatha in substitution of the kasra, وهو مجرور, but more importantly it's majroor because of the idafa of the word millah towards it. Okay. شروط الحال وشروط صاحبها. The conditions and the requirements for the hal, in other words the ism that's describing the state, وشروط صاحبها, and the conditions and the requirements for the noun at the front whose state is being described, the Ṣāḥibul Ḥāl. So they call it Dhul Ḥāl and they also call it Ṣāḥibul Ḥāl. قال ولا يكون إلا نكرة. The Mu'allif says that the Hal will always be nakira. And this is true. The Hal will always be nakira. ولا يكون إلا بعد تمام الكلام. And the Hal will not come except after the speech is already complete. Okay, so that's just a complicated way of saying that a Hal should not precede the Dhul Ḥāl. It should be because the Dhul Ḥāl would be the file. Okay, the Dhul Ḥāl would be the Dhul Ḥāl is like Zayd came riding, right? So the word Zayd is the Dhul Ḥāl. So we have our fi'l, we have our file. So with the fi'l and the file, the sentence is complete in terms of the essentials. It's done. And the Hal should come now. Once the sentence is over, the Hal should come now. Which means that bringing it first in between the fi'l and the file is problematic. So the author is saying don't do that. وَلَا يَكُونُ إِلَّا بَعْدَ تَمَامِ الْكَلَامِ. And the Hal should only come after the speech is done. Okay, which means that the fi'l has received its file or the mubtada has received its khabar. And then the Hal will come third. وَلَا يَكُونُ صَاحِبُهَا إِلَّا مَعْرِفَةً. And the Dhul Ḥāl can only be ma'rifah. Okay, which isn't really true because it's possible for the Dhul Ḥāl to be nakira as well. If the Dhul Ḥāl is nakira, then you have to invert the structure in order to avoid the confusion with the mawsuf and the sifa, which is what I alluded to earlier. And I apologize if the amount of detail I'm giving you here is a lot, but I'd rather give you everything than have this unclear. And in this one particular, if you haven't been commenting on the earlier videos, you're watching them but you're not commenting, please go ahead and comment on this one. Like, I mean, do you appreciate this amount of detail? Okay, وأقول يجب في الحال أن يكون نكرة. The commentator now elaborates and he says the things that the author mentioned and also adds to it and mentions other things that the author may have skipped. Okay, so وأقول يجب في الحال أن يكون نكرة. Rule number 1 is that within the hal, it's mandatory for it to be nakira. ولا يجوز أن يكون معرفة. And it's not permissible for a hal to be معرفة. وإذا جاء تركيب فيه الحال معرفة في الظاهر فيه الحال معرفة في الظاهر. Okay. وإذا جاء تركيب فيه الحال معرفة في الظاهر. Okay, I think that's fine. معرفة في الظاهر should be okay. فإنه يجب تأويل هذه المعرفة بنكرة مثل قولهم جاء الأمير وحده. Okay, so if ever a sentence occurs in which there's a hal that's ma'rifa outwardly, it seems to be ma'rifa, like it's mudaf to a pronoun, for example, wahdahu is mudaf to a pronoun, so which makes it ma'rifa. Then what do you do? He says فإنه يجب تأويل هذه المعرفة. Then it will be necessary to interpret this definite ism in the meaning of an indefinite. In other words, the يضحك ضاحكا thing, you have to do ta'wil. مثل قولهم, like their statement جاء الأمير وحده, the leader, the Amir, came by himself. فإن وحده, because وحده حال من الأمير is حال describing the state of the Amir, وهو معرفة, and value-wise it's معرفة, like technically or grammatically it's definite due to its being mudaf to a pronoun. ولكنه في تأويل نكرة, however, it's in the interpretation of an indefinite, and that would be your adjective munfaridan. So وحده and munfaridan are interchangeable, they both mean the same thing. In other words, by himself, alone. فكأنك قلت, so it's as if you said جاء الأمير منفردا, and that satisfies the requirement. ومثل ذلك قولهم, and similar to that would be the saying of the Arab people, أرسلها العراك أي معتركة, that he let loose the antelope, or no, it's like it's some moose, deer, some large animal, wild animal. It's like they call it himarul wahsh, which is like it's not a donkey. It's like in the deer family. Like in Urdu they call it nilgai. So he let loose the deer or the moose in a state of chaos. Iraq fending for itself. Okay, so this is a poet, and it's talking about a place where there's a water source and there's animals that are competing with one another and trying to secure for themselves water. So this animal has to fend for itself, and it's a chaotic situation. So that's what he's describing. So al-Iraka is apparently, it's an adjective. It's actually a masdar in the meaning of the ismul fa'il. So al-Iraq in the meaning araka yu'ariku or i'taraka ya'tariku, it means to fend for oneself and to defend oneself and to survive amidst chaos, basically. Mu'tarikatan waja'u al-awwala fal-awwala, and they came one after the other. So it's describing the state of how they came. It's answering the question how. Al-awwala fal-awwala ay mutarattibina, they came in an organized fashion. Mutarattibina, they came in an orderly way. Okay, so mutarattibina is nakira. Al-awwala fal-awwala is ma'rifa, but it's in the ta'wil of mutarattibina, which validates the use of the hal. The phrase it's sanctioned. Okay, so it has to be nakira, either a true nakira or something that could easily be understood in the meaning of a nakira. It could be interchanged with something that is nakira. والأصل في الحال أن يجيء بعد استيفاء الكلام, and the default within the hal is for it to occur after the speech is already complete. ومعنى استيفاء الكلام, and the meaning of the speech being complete, أن يأخذ الفعل فاعله والمبتدأ خبره is for the فعل, for the verb to have received its fa'il and for the mubtada to have received its khabar. So you want it number 3 and you don't want it number 2 where you have a fi'l and then you have a hal and then you have the Ṣāḥib al-Ḥāl delayed. You don't want that. وَرُبَّمَا وَجَبَ تَقْدِيمُ الْحَالِ. However, at certain occasions or in rare cases, the taqdeem of the hal is wajib, bringing forward and advancing the hal على جميع أجزاء الكلام, on all of the portions of the sentence is wajib. Now, all of the portions that would happen in istifham, if you're asking a question, and it just so happens that the pronoun that's being used to ask the question is kayfa. And there's another principle in grammar that says anything that's istifhamiyya laha sadrul kalam. It must be at the front of the sentence. So that and in the nakira situation where the Ṣāḥib al-Ḥāl is nakira, you have to invert it in order to avoid confusion with the mawsul sifa, because sifa can't come first. In case I didn't tell you already, sifa can't come first, hal can't come first. You see, so there's so a hal actually has a lot in common with the sifa, more than you probably thought, right? So that's why these requirements are there, in order to distinguish one phrase from the other phrase. Okay, remember in the beginning of the first class I said 2 halves of grammar. 1 half is to appreciate and understand the roles, the 22 possible ways this will be used, and the other half of grammar is to know the sanctioned methods of how to join words together, particularly the phrase level relationships. You see that's popping up again and again, right? وَرُبَّمَا وَجَبَ تَقْدِيمُ الْحَالِ عَلَى جَمِيعِ أَجْزَاءِ الْكَلَامِ, and in rare cases, advancing the hal and bringing it forward in front of all of the rest of the portions of the sentence is mandatory. كما إذا كان الحال اسم استفهام, such as when the hal is an interrogative pronoun. نحو كيف قدم علي, how did Zayd come? So over here كيف is a Naṣb. It's in the place of Naṣb on the basis of hal. It's mabni, كيف is mabni, but it's in the place of Naṣb. So he says that. فكيف اسم استفهام. So the word كيف is a اسم استفهام, in other words interrogative pronoun. مبني على الفتح, مبني on fatha, في محل نصب, in the place of nasab, حال من علي, حال from the upcoming word علي. ولا يجوز تأخير اسم الاستفهام, and delaying an اسم الاستفهام is not allowed. ويشترط في صاحب الحال أن يكون معرفة, and it's stipulated within the صاحب الحال for it to be definite. In other words, overwhelmingly it's supposed to be definite. فلا يجوز أن يكون نكرة بغير مسوغ. So it is not valid and it is not permissible for a صاحب الحال to be nakira without a justification, without something that gives it credence or justifies it, or makes it permissible, something that makes it permissible. And from the factors, from the things that make a nakira occurring as a Dhul Ḥāl permissible is مجيء الحال من ومما يسوغ مجيء الحال من النكرة أن تتقدم الحال عليها. And from the factors that justify the hal occurring from a nakira is for the hal to precede it and come before it. كقول الشاعر, like the saying of the poet, لميت موحشا طلل يلوح كأنه خلل. So Maya is the name of a female with a capital M. Maya has some ruins that are scary. She has some ruins, in other words, her deserted home is really, really scary. يَلُوحُ كَأَنَّهُ خِلَل, it appears as if it's like withering garment, like a withering garment. كَأَنَّهُ خِلَل. Okay, I have no earthly idea what the poet is talking about, but the point of the example is طَلَلٌ مُوحِشًا. طَلَلٌ مُوحِشًا, and the word طَلَل is the Dhul Ḥāl and is delayed. مُوحِشًا is the hal coming first, and طَلَل is nakira. But what justified the structure is the hal coming first. فموحشا حال من طلل وطلل نكرة وصوغ مجيء الحال منه تقدمها عليه. And what validated and justified the hal occurring from the word طلل was the hals preceding it and coming before it. ومما يسوغ مجيء الحال من النكرة أن تخصص هذه النكرة بإضافة. And from those factors that justify the hal occurring from a nakira is for that nakira to be modified and specified by way of idafa or by way of wasf. So it's a phrase, and the two together is like so it's become not just any 4 things, 4 days. So the word days clarifies the word 4, because 4 could have meant 4 apples, and it could have meant 4 nights, and it could have meant 4 months or 4 years or 4 anything. And ayyamin comes and narrows it down, and so narrowing it down makes it more concrete and makes it more closer to a definite. It's still indefinite, but it's closer to a definite. And now sawa'an would work. So within 4 days that are equal and complete. Sawa'an. Okay, I'm not sure what the verse is referring to. You'd have to look up the tafsir. But that's basically the point of the example. Is arba'ati ayyam is a majrur of the fi, which he told you earlier that Ṣāḥib al-Ḥāl could be a majrur biharfi jar. But the point of the example here is that it's not definite, but it's a modified indefinite, and the modification is happening by way of idafa. And then he gives a further example where the modification is happening by way of sifa, and that's coming down here. فَسَوَاءً حَالٌ مِّنْ أَرْبَعَةٍ. So the word sawa'an is hal from arba'a, and arba'a is nakira. وَسَاغَ مَجِيءُ الْحَالِ مِنْهَا. And the coming of a hal from this indefinite arba'a word is valid and permissible due to it being mudaf, لِكَوْنِهَا مُضَافَةً. وَمِثَالُ الثَّانِي, and the second example, the Naʿt example, is the saying of the poet, نَجَّيْتَ يَا رَبِّي, you saved and rescued, O Lord, Nuḥan, the Prophet Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, وَاسْتَجَبْتَ لَهُ, and you responded to his call for help, فِي فُلُكٍ مَاخِرٍ فِي الْيَمِّ مَشْحُونًا, within an ark that was cutting through the waves, within the sea, mashhunan, fully loaded with cargo and fully loaded with animals and humans. Mashhunan means fully loaded, and over here fulukin is Dhul Ḥāl and it's nakira, but what made it permissible is the fact that makhirin fil yammi, which is a phrase. Makhirin fil yammi means cutting through the sea, and cutting through the sea is describing the boat and the ark. So it's not just any ark, it's specifically the ark that was moving at this fast pace. Okay, so that concludes the discussion on the hal, and the tamiz. I think it's better if we do that in a separate video, and we'll see you then. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.